Okay, it's still Monday, November 3rd, and it's about 8:24, so I'll call this meeting of the Urbana City Council Committee of the Whole to order, special meeting. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Ms. Ammons,
Here.
Mr. Brown,
Here.
Mr. Jacobson,
Here.
Mr. Madigan,
Here.
Ms. Marlin,
Here.
Mr. Roberts,
Here.
Mr. Smythe,
Here.
Mayor Pressing.
Here.
Is there, I didn't get any cards. Is there any public input, petitions, or communications? Anybody want to speak? We have one item on the agenda. It's a resolution number 2014-11-059R, resolution to endorse the Champaign-Urbana Urbanized Area Transportation Study, Long Range Transportation Plan 2040. Libby Tyler and Bill Gray will talk about it first.
Yes, thank you, Councilor Brown. Tonight, Libby and I wanted to give a little introduction prior to the presentation by CUAT staff Rita Black and Ashley McLaughlin. So we have a few opening remarks. First of all, just a brief background of what is a long-range transportation plan and why are we doing this. The Federal Highway Administration requires that we do a 5-year update or plan for any metropolitan planning organization, which is what we are. Our MPO is called CUATS, the Champaign-Urbana Area Transportation Study. And this update, although is every 5 years, the process to do the update can be anywhere from 2.5 to 3 years long process. So even though we'll complete this process at the end of this year, Rita and her staff get a little break for about 1.5 years, 2 years, and it starts all over again. So it's almost a never-ending process. But it's a very important document for a variety of reasons. But first of all, it's a compilation of the various agencies' plans. The agencies that make up CUATS, of course, are the Village of Savoy, City of Champaign, Urbana, Mass Transit District, IDOT, and the University of Illinois, and the county, Champaign County. So there's a multi-agency involvement and input into this. So it's a reflection of, in our community, what is the transportation plan, what is it that we currently have, what are the existing conditions, and what, as we look 25 years from now, what is our roadmap to try to achieve future goals. So there's a series of meetings that have occurred. In fact, CUATS has been recognized for its innovativeness in public engagement process. In fact, if some of you had been to some of the Wednesday Park District neighborhood nights, you'll have seen a bus decked out in the plan and seeking input, and it was retrofitted, if you will, to seek to portray posters and seek input, and it was a very great way to get comments in the community. In fact, there's been as many as 1,500 comments received on this plan. So the LRTP is a document that Federal Highway and the Illinois Department of Transportation look at in any MPO, because with that plan, that helps communities receive grants. And Urbana has been no stranger to receiving state and federal grants. It's no secret that Olympian Drive, Lincoln Avenue, High Cross Road Side Path, Main Street, Rayson Main Street, Windsor Road, Safe Routes to School. We've received literally millions of dollars in grants over the last 5 years, and a lot of that, and very importantly, is because we have a good long-range transportation plan, and we've done good internal planning, such as our bike master plan and our capital improvement plan and such. So those are very important documents. Intergovernmental cooperation is important for the success of any group of communities, and needless to say, each community has its own lists of desires, wants, needs, goals, and we're no different than any of the other agencies that we partner with. So please keep that in mind, that as we provide our comments, the CUAT staff is kind of a melting pot of taking all these pieces of input and trying to formulate a plan that is best to serve us in all modes of transportation. And I think we've made great strides. When I look back 5 or even 10 years ago to today, we've made tremendous strides in our transit area, in our bicycle facilities area, in our pedestrian area. We've made decisions to restrict or constrict traffic flow like on campus, not make it so user-friendly when it comes to vehicles. There's a host of strategies that we've implemented that are reflected in this plan, and it's really it's a tribute and success to all of us as we have contributed to this and as we move forward and look forward. And there's been a lot of great comments that we have received, and I know Kuwait staff is taking all those comments seriously, including them in the plan and moving forward. What else did I want to add? I will stop. I know Libby had a few things she wanted to add.
Just a little more in the planning process. I think Jeff handed out a list of some of the meetings. So this latest version of the LRTP started even before 2013, and this lists all the different public meetings, but we do city planning staff as well as the public works staff do get involved very early on, hands-on with the other agencies as part of a technical committee, LRTP technical committee, and so that that process started several months ago, and then we've periodically updated our planning commission. There's been all these public presentations, earlier presentations to the planning commission and other bodies, then also review by the regional planning commission and the CUATS technical committee, which Bill and I both sit on, reviewed that as well, and again the CUATS policy committee. So there's just a whole intermeshing of different planning processes that go on. We are heading towards the end of this long public process. There was a 30-day formal review period of a complete draft, and I think you'll remember back in July there was a partial draft that we had some pretty extensive discussion and presentation on. So these documents, for anyone who wasn't able to go to the meetings or wanted to see the final version of the draft, has been able to come into our office and fill out comment cards in many other locations around the metropolitan area. And part of that formal process of this plan is to get input from our boards and commissions that advise the city council. So we had this great meeting last Thursday, and I know at least 3 of the council members were able to be there. We set up a kiddie table in the front, and we have the full dais for our 3 boards and commissions that are interested, including our plan commission, which of course is most involved with land use plans and transportation planning for the city, bicycle and pedestrian advisory commission, which takes particular look at bicycle facilities and pedestrian facilities, and our sustainability advisory commission, because these are all of course related to the environment. And it was a great discussion. We don't have complete minutes, but I thought I would just give you some of the highlights of the things that were talked about. There was a lot of interest in the models that were used to develop the plan. There's a series of models that were used in developing the plan. A very interesting discussion on our choices on transit and how we've emphasized bus improvement to bus transit in recent years as opposed to intercity rail. But that was a very good question to ask. Well, is there a day that we can get back to rail or maybe achieve that? We talked about interurban rail and the Amtrak ridership and how that's improved, as well as the potential for high-speed rail. There was, discussion about, the big question of roads versus transit. Some really, really great comments, and how roads can sometimes encourage growth where it may not be needed in the timing of those road improvements. And Curtis Road was one future roadway in Urbana that we talked about quite a bit. There were some discrepancies in the document that were identified, some errors, some things to add. What I would like to do is just clarify that, yes, we want comments. It's not closed. There's a lot of things to say. Planning is a process. It never really concludes in some ways. We have a system of plans. We talk about that in our comprehensive plan. Our comprehensive plan is still very valid. We know it's been 10 years, but it's still our guiding document. This particular plan is consistent with our comprehensive plan. It's guided by that. It's consistent with some of our other plans that are pertinent, but it's not a replacement for those plans. We still follow our comprehensive plan. The LRTP governs the regional transportation aspects. We want them to be able to talk to each other. And then we have our bike master plans, and we're in the middle of an update to that. So there's never a point where all of your plans are going to be completely consistent with each other, but you still keep working with the process and the system of plans. And I would just like to say that I think that this is an excellent plan that reflects the community, reflects the input that's been provided. It's consistent with all the comprehensive plans and other plans that we've prepared in the city and will help us to move forward. But again, we want feedback, and I've seen some great commentary in the last few days coming forward from people who attended the meeting, as well as the council members, and I know that the RPC staff is here tonight, and they've already begun making some of those adjustments. So I think that's all I had from this. Any questions for staff at this point
Thank you.
on the process?
Any
or-
questions for Libby or Bill?
Then we'd like to introduce Rita Black and Ashley McLaughlin to make their presentation.
Good evening. Glad to be here today again. They stole my presentation, then Ashley will start.
Okay, thanks for sticking around so late for us tonight. Like was already mentioned, we were here in July. These are the four main components of our plan. We start with a lot of background data. We establish the existing conditions in the community. Then we look at planning for the future and establish a 2040 vision. So in the previous time we were here in July, we covered the first two, background data, which is a lot of community data and historical data, existing conditions, which included a lot of our extensive public outreach, where we tried to get a more well-rounded view of the user experience of the transportation system in the community. So tonight we're going to focus on planning for the future and the 2040 vision. And before I start, did everyone get a copy of the updated Chapter 12 of the plan? Yeah. Maybe not?
No, we have these.
Yes, okay.
Could you please update the picture that you used, because that's not what Main Street looks like anymore?
Yes.
And
There
you
are
have
actually several
You have bicyclists
pictures.
going the wrong way on the, well, you've got them on the sidewalk, and sidewalk riding in downtown Urbana is not allowed.
Yes.
Isn't this in Champaign?
It looks like,
Looks like
is it Champaign?
Walnut and Neil.
Is it? Or, oh, is it? Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, I thought it was Maine and, well, I'm totally off what door it is. The snow there, I can't tell.
Well,
Is
despite
snow?
that, there are some photos that need to be updated, some
okay.
duplicates.
Can you tell us
Um,
what the first one is?
What that photo is?
Yeah.
I can't, but it is Champagne, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
it's May,
Is
it's
the bra- is the
Walnut
brass rail?
and
Okay, I've
and
got it
Neil.
going the wrong way.
We would give them a $100 ticket.
So
I just hate thinking somebody riding on a sidewalk.
we'll be starting with Section 3 tonight, Planning for the Future. I'm just recovering from a bit of a cough, so excuse me in advance if I have to take a break to gag for a second. So in terms of planning for the future, we have several different components here. We did some public visioning meetings to see what community members wanted for the future of their community. We got input from our member agencies, and so each agency contributed projects that they wanted to see happen in the 25-year planning horizon. We looked at reference studies, as was already mentioned, for all the jurisdictions within the planning area. Because the LRTP does not replace or trump any existing plans. It is just a coordinating plan for the multiple jurisdictions. And then we, from all of that input and our previous input about existing conditions, as well as research, we established 6 planning pillars to help guide the focus of the document's vision. And then we also have, as was also already referenced, our statistical models. So we have 6 statistical models that we run in CUATS to help us quantify some of the impacts of these future development decisions. So first, the visioning meetings. We had 4 different ones targeted at specific populations. One was for open to the general public, one was for business developers, one was for youth, and one was for social service employees who work mostly in the rural areas. The main questions asked here were, where will we be in 2040 if we do nothing? And where would you like to, what would you like to see for your community in 2040? So we are basically trying to get at whether people saw any discrepancies between their expectations and their hopes for the future. For these meetings, this poster was a result of the public visioning meeting. We hired an outside facilitator to facilitate the conversation, to kind of remove ourselves from the conversation. We also hired a graphic recorder to draw the conversation live. So this helped people see their input being tangibly registered as it was happening. It also just helped engage the public and get more people to our meetings. And it also helped staff assess and evaluate and analyze the information after the fact, and serves as public record for those who weren't able to make it. Next, we collected some agency input. So I know you can't read this text is very small, but we got a list of 42 different projects that were submitted by the different member agencies, different projects that they wanted to see happen before 2040. These agencies were divided into 3 different time periods by the projects were divided into 3 different time periods by the agencies themselves. So we then put them on this board, and we had members of the public vote on them. So the numbers you see here to the right and the colored dots actually represent the number of votes that they got. Those numbers were then normalized, given that there were more votes, of course, for the 2030 to 2040 projects, because there weren't as many of them. But I'll just tell you some of the highlights there. What do you call it? High-speed rail network was a very popular one, as was the Kickapoo Trail. So we used these projects then to inform the projects that made it onto our vision maps for the roadway projects, transit projects, and bike and pedestrian projects. This is a representation. This is not an exhaustive representation, but this is a list of some of the local plans that we considered when we were looking at developing our 6 planning pillars and looking at what strategies were already in place in the community for transportation development in the future. And then these are the 6 planning pillars we came up with. So as I mentioned, these come from the public input we received, the research we did on existing conditions, the goals and objectives of federal and state transportation plans, and then also the existing plans from the community. So the first one is safety and security, the second one is balanced development, the third one is multimodal connectivity, the fourth one is accessibility and affordability, the fifth one is healthy neighborhoods, and the sixth one is resilient economy. And these are each detailed further in Chapter 9, I believe it is, in the plan. And then lastly, in order to run our statistical models, we needed to define some different development scenarios with which to compare different development decisions. So the first scenario we established was what we called traditional development, and this is based on existing trends of development in the community. The lines in red here on this map are the roadway network from 1914. And then as you can see, we've expanded out from there. So the lines on the far periphery are all the roads that have been built since 1960. And this represents a lot of peripheral development in the transportation network. So with every additional mile of roadway, we obviously have to pay construction costs as well as annual operations and maintenance costs. So this plan represents a lot of peripheral development on open land where the land itself and construction might be a bit cheaper. For the 2040 vision, we really based this off of the 6 pillars that we already mentioned. So we're focused on developing the core of the community with more complete streets to accommodate bikes, pedestrians, buses, cars, and buses. That also includes the MCORE project that we've already talked about a bit. And then, excuse me, focusing on an enhanced arterial around the community to facilitate higher speed car traffic as well as transit and freight traffic. Although those roads we're also proposing be designed as complete streets, meaning they would also accommodate bikes and pedestrians as well. And then also regional connectivity in strategic locations like a high-speed rail corridor where the Amtrak corridor currently is, the Rails to Trails projects to Kickapoo State Park, and Willard Airport is also on the map there. So this is an overview of our models. I'm not going to go into the models in detail. People don't generally want to hear that information, although we did have some interest in it last time. So we do have some of our modeling experts here tonight to answer specific questions if you have them. And we can also open up our office, of course, to anyone that has additional question or really wants to dig into the details of our models. So to begin with, we do population and employment projections. These are based on these aren't models per se. In order to start our projection process, we use some spreadsheets developed by Dr. Andy Isserman at the University of Illinois. For population, we use an interregional cohort component model. I don't know what the title of the employment projection spreadsheet is, but at any rate, the final step of the projections are to get approval from each of the municipalities for their specific districts. So there are 307 traffic analysis zones throughout the county, and each of those zones is reviewed by each of the municipalities for population and employment numbers into the future in 5-year time intervals. So we're pretty confident in our numbers, but again, these are projections. So for population, you see on top there in red and orange, the red line is for traditional development. We're expecting about 45,000 additional people in the county overall by 2040. And for the 2040 vision, we're expecting another 5,000 on top of that. So not a big difference for the 2040 vision as compared to the traditional development vision or scenario. Oops, sorry. For employment, we have there on the bottom in red and, in green and blue. For traditional development, this is the blue line on the bottom. We're expecting about 48,000 additional jobs in the county overall through 2040, and another 15,000 on top of that for about 60,000 additional jobs in the county overall by 2040. So the big difference in terms of job generators between the 2040 vision and the traditional development scenarios is anticipation of high-speed rail construction and an enlargement of the Illinois terminal in downtown Champaign to expand for additional bus traffic, high-speed rail traffic, and commercial development. And also just to clarify that discrepancy between more employment as opposed to population, since there's 15,000 more employees but only 5,000 more people living in the county overall, that actually represents a lower unemployment rate. So it's not unlike the unemployment rate that we saw before 2008, for instance. So we're not necessarily seeing thousands of more jobs. It's more like recouping a lot of the jobs that we lost since 2008. So first, we have a travel demand model that helps us project congestion given different types of development. What I'll point out here is that in the Sustainable Choices 2040 vision, we see a significant mode shift to transit. You'll notice that the number here at the bottom is 9,000 compared to 5,000, and these are daily home-based work trips by mode. We measure this in a lot of different ways, but this is the one of the most consistent set of numbers we have are home-based work trips. So we see an increase in all the modes, but this is the most significant one that we see, transit and walking for the 2040 scenario. And that's also represented down here. You can see in terms of new users, we see more walkers and more transit. But even in the traditional development scenario, we see more bikers and more walkers in 2040. Next, we have a land use evaluation and assessment model. This model helps us evaluate where these extra people and jobs will be in 2040. And I'll just point out here that on the left here, you see traditional development. On the right here, you see the 2040 scenario. You don't see a huge difference between these top two in population because the numbers really aren't that different. But you can see darker shaded areas in the core area for the 2040 vision. Thanks. Because we are anticipating more infill development based on local area land use plans, not based on our transportation network alone. And then on the bottom for employment, it's a little clearer to see that more of the jobs are concentrated here in the core of the community. Next, we have our social cost of alternative land development scenarios. This gives us an idea of how infrastructure costs might change given different development patterns. The main shift here, I'll point out, is that in terms of new housing units by type, for Sustainable Choices 2040, we're predicting more multi-family units because of the fact that they'll be in the core of the community rather than on peripheral areas. And so this is the biggest difference here between the traditional development scenario and the Sustainable Choices 2040 scenario. So that, in turn, will give us lower energy costs and lower infrastructure costs because those units are traditionally more efficient. Next, we have our motor vehicle emission simulator. This gives us an idea of emissions given different mode shifts. So with more people walking and taking transit, we see lower emissions per capita for the 2040 scenario. That said, we see most emissions increasing overall in both scenarios simply because we have more people and more employees in the community. And then our last two models are actually local area models. The previous ones I talked about were all at the county level. These last two are newer tools that we've developed in the past couple years for this plan. This one is called Local Accessibility and Mobility Analysis. And this gives us an idea at the neighborhood level what people's access is and mobility is in different areas of the community. So overlaying the transportation system with access to different services in the community, as well as we've also included the public input that we received during our public outreach for the long-range transportation plan. So all of those 1,500 plus comments are all geocoded in these specific neighborhoods to give people an idea of what kinds of issues people are having in different areas or where they see things functioning well, for instance. So this is detailed in the appendix further, and we can answer more specific questions about this a little later if you'd like. And then the last model is the health impact assessment. We're trying to do a more thorough analysis of how the transportation system is related to local population health. So we have geocoded illness data from a local health jurisdiction, and we're able to overlay that with the transportation network and access to modes of active transportation, as well as access to different services that impact health, like health services, grocery stores, etc., to give an idea of, for instance, where we see higher occurrences of obesity, if those are areas where we can improve the sidewalk or bike network in order to have a positive impact on the daily amount of physical activity that people in those neighborhoods have access to. So that's a very general overview of our models. Like I said, we can talk to you in more detail about that later if you'd like, or on a different day if you're all too tired for the numbers. Lastly, I'm going to move on to our 2040 vision. So here we have our transportation mode project maps as well as a funding table for the future. So I showed you this map earlier. This is kind of our conceptual vision map where we're focusing on increasing accessibility in the core of the community by increasing complete streets and bridges, as well as multimodal corridor enhancement project. Looking at increasing mobility in an enhanced arterial system here in the shaded blue area, and then improving regional connectivity in these strategic locations via Rails to Trails projects and the high-speed rail corridor. So here is our first most muddled map. This is the LRTP pedestrian and bicycle vision. This map actually contains over 700 separate projects. These aren't projects that are required to be included in the LRTP. They're mostly just here as a reference point for more specific plans that deal with these projects, like the Greenways and Trails Plan, the Urbana Bicycle Master Plan, the Champaign Pedestrian Plan, etc. So this is a compilation of all of those projects. And we've included it here because these three in red are actually projects that were voted as public priorities during our outreach events. And so those have been included here on the project. But the projects themselves, we have a table listing kind of the parameters of the different projects in an appendix of the document. But for further detail, we really recommend that people visit the Greenways and Trails plans or the other plans where they originate in, and that information is also included in the appendix. For the Transit Rail and Air Vision, we have 7 main projects listed here. The first one is the high-speed rail corridor that's shown in red alongside the Amtrak rail. The second one is increased Amtrak frequency to meet the increased demand for Amtrak ridership. All of those stats were shown in our previous presentation, but we can revisit those if you would like. The third project is the High Capacity Transit Network. That's the MCOR project that was referenced, that CUMTD recently got funding for. The fourth one, excuse me, are the transit hubs that CUMTD has proposed in strategic locations around the region. These are to accommodate trips that are that wouldn't have to be routed through campus. So these are hubs that would more efficiently serve the areas surrounding these hubs so that they could decrease travel times and increase efficiency. The fifth one is to make the CUMTD service area coterminous with the urbanized area. As of right now, there are still pockets of the urbanized area, residential spots that are left outside of the service area. The sixth one is the Illinois terminal expansion that would likely happen if there were to be implementation of a high-speed rail corridor. Like I said, that could also include commercial development, but would certainly accommodate additional bus frequency and high-speed rail stop. And then number 7 is essentially just a placeholder for the Willard Airport. We don't have specific recommendations listed for Willard Airport. We are pending the findings of the Willard Airport Task Force and would like to support their findings. Lastly, we have the roadway vision. There are a lot more projects listed here, and I'm just going to point out kind of the general color coding of the map before talking about any of the specific projects. So first, we have here a repeat of the green projects, the MCOR projects. And just for your reference, this number 26 right here is a typo. I'm not sure why it's there, so just pretend that's not there. 26 is actually up here in Mahomet. And while I'm there, I might as well tell you, these Mahomet projects, excuse me, we do not talk about in detail. They are not, Mahomet is not actually a member agency, but they are in our planning area, so we have included a handful of their projects from their pending transportation master plan that hasn't been approved yet, but we did want to reference some of the work that they're doing on their own transportation network. So next, the other projects in red actually represent the projects that were voted as priorities by the public. So these are projects that were submitted by each of our member agencies that then the public voted on and prioritized as the ones that they thought were most important to happen before 2040. Next, we have projects in blue around the corridor. Those are projects that were carried over from the 2035 plan, and those function as part of the enhanced arterial network that we're proposing. Except this section here in pink is actually just a corridor study that was proposed. In the 2035 plan, there was a specific design proposed for this portion of Curtis Road, but it has already been brought up to us that that design is not necessarily desired or has not really been approved at this point, or priorities have potentially changed. And so we took out the specifics of that road design and changed it over to a corridor study to see, given that we've received input that that road is not safe in that area to accommodate the traffic currently on it, we're proposing a study to determine what design would be best. Then the projects that are left in yellow and orange, those are projects that are ongoing or currently in progress that were from the 2035 plan. And these shaded areas here, well, we'll talk about next, are possible interchanges that were discussed in the previous plan that are still pending if there is further development that would warrant that in these areas. So to go over in slightly more detail, again, this is the green MCOR project. This one up top here is the Olympian Drive extension. If there is future development to support that before 2040. This is a continuation of 2035, preserving the rural character of that roadway. Like I said, possible interchange. This section here is currently in progress on Illinois 130. This here is a Florida extension to 130. This is not only an agency priority, but also a public priority, as noted in red. Here we have Illinois 130 improvements in blue, the corridor study I already mentioned, and then the MCOR projects in here. Over here, for the other agency priorities, I will just make a note that these were really consistent with the planning pillars that we received from the initial round of comments about existing conditions. When we took these projects back to the public to vote on and prioritize, they prioritized ones that really focused on pedestrian and bicycle safety. And so these are all, in one way or another, complete streets projects. So we have two intersection improvements here to increase safety, and then the rest of these are complete streets projects, either in bridges or roadway sections. Lastly, we have our funding table and maps. So as part of the requirements for the long-range transportation plan, we have to include fiscally constrained projects. Given that we don't project funding for these specific projects into the future, we only consider the projects that we know to be approved and to have funding in our current transportation improvement program, and that's applicable for fiscal years 15 through 18. The current total for that is about $145,000, and all of those projects are mapped here, as well as relevant transportation system projects from the City of Urbana's CIP and the City of Champaign's CIP. It's just a slightly closer up. And then, excuse me, additionally, we have fiscally constrained bicycle and pedestrian projects. These are projects that local agencies have reported that have secured funding through fiscal year 18. So when it came to projecting funds for the future, we basically used historic trends, and then each agency provided us with their own growth rate for projecting revenues and expenditures into the future. While we have significant revenues here, we only include expenditures that we know are already improved, referencing back to our transportation improvement program. So we've only included expenditures in that program that we know are already approved. We don't assign funding or priority to any of the projects listed in our visions. It's a vision, and that's it. None of those projects have received funding or are on the docket to get funded necessarily at this point. So, and I'll just point out here that the MCOR project, the $15.7 million recently approved, since it hasn't yet been appropriated, is not included in this table. And that concludes my summary of kind of the last half of our long-range transportation plan. We are doing these agency presentations through the month of December, essentially. Like Libby already mentioned, the public comment period for the document open to the public actually closed on Friday, but we are still doing these agency presentations and receiving comments from our member agencies. And so before final approval, which will happen at the end of November with the RPC board and in the beginning of December with the CUATS Policy and Technical Committee, we will be incorporating the comments received as a result of our presentations and as a result of the public comment period, and then presenting them with a final document. So that is all I have for now. We would be happy to answer additional questions.
Okay, thank you. Eric?
So, looking at your high-speed rail projection, there seems to be an assumption that this would follow the present Amtrak rail. I might be wrong about this, but my impression of the political realities are that if we get high-speed rail, it's going to swing over to Springfield and then south.
Yes. It is highly likely that it won't follow the exact same path. Mm-hmm. So we use this path essentially for the sake of readability to the public. When we talked to the expert on campus who was part of the feasibility study, he informed us that it would likely be a slightly different path, but he couldn't confirm what path exactly. And so since without that confirmation, we didn't feel comfortable putting that on the map, but just use the existing corridor as a representation of that, if that makes sense.
You know, okay. Yeah, I just, okay. As long as you don't believe that this would be a substantial modification of anything else for it to swing over to Springfield, probably not.
I don't know about Springfield per se, to be perfectly honest, but he did say that the track would likely not follow that exact corridor.
Mayor Press, I think the mayor has.
The plan that was done by the major consulting firm, can't think of their name right now, but they were talking about going south and then over to Decatur.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it was going through here and then at some point turning west on existing rail lines.
New rail lines, potentially using part of the existing corridor.
Right, but
Yeah.
then we talked about having the overhead So that would free it up.
Right,
But,
right.
you know, the
That's a
land
possibility as
is
well.
there, so
Mhm.
you've got the right-of-way.
Right.
So Oak
Bill?
Gray knows about it.
Well, just to further clarify, there's high-speed rail and then there's bullet trains, okay? And the high-speed rail that you may be referring to is the current construction from Chicago to St. Louis via Springfield. That's max 110 mile per hour. What we're referring to in this plan is bullet speed or over 200 mile per hour. And there's been a very preliminary feasibility study done by the University of Illinois and other consultants with IDOT funding the study. The Midwest High Speed Rail Association, we all have been promoting. In fact, when Champaign County First, the lobby group has been going to Washington, D.C. for the last at least 4 or 5 times promoting high-speed rail. It's from Chicago through Champaign-Urbana, going to St. Louis via Decatur, Springfield. And also, we'd like to see us be a hub to maybe link to Indianapolis. That possibility is there. So that's what we're trying to promote, is the 220 speed or greater through Champaign-Urbana as a hub. So not via Springfield, but through Champaign-Urbana to Springfield to St. Louis.
Oh, that's what I meant.
Okay,
That's the
but through here. Okay, I'm sorry. Then I misunderstood. Okay.
Anyone else? Dennis?
You were saying that you're going to be presenting to a few more agencies before the finalization of the plan. Could you indicate what those are going to be and what other opportunities you will have or people will have to interact?
The last agency is the University of Illinois. We will be presenting to the Office of the Chancellor, and we will not be presenting to the Board of Trustees. It's just as information to them. It's the
Okay.
last agency.
So that would not be a public presentation? That'd
No,
be,
no. This is the last public presentation that we are making.
All right.
Sadly, it's the last one.
Another one, Dennis.
Some more. So I did attend the presentation you made to the Planning Commission, Sustainability Commission, and the third one, I can't remember the name of it. Bike and Master Plan. Again, it was a very thorough, there was a really good interaction, and there were questions and answers. You mentioned quite a few of them. So one of the things that that was discussed was how can, or at this point, is it possible to tweak the plan? Is it possible to include some things that may have been overlooked or not included? You did explain that many of the agencies have already put input into them. There was a discussion about, well, you know, Urbana felt like some of its issues are perhaps different than maybe the agencies involved. We are more responsive to the public itself. We have a lot of public input. You did, of course, take this to a lot of venues. I appreciate that completely. So some of the questions that came up had to do with the very topics that you mentioned as part of review. One of the topics that I found or is interest to me was it seemed that there was a real lack of consideration for another sustainable type of transportation, since this is a transportation plan and it's regional, which really also means it's local, and that would be the consideration of within 25 years, or you know, it may be like 50 years, or it may be even 15 years, would there be a possibility to evolve or come back and revisit urban transportation, interurban transportation, intercity transportation using rail? You know, we have a history in this community of having had trolley service. An interurban line was evolved in 1902. It became electrified. It served not only the Urbana city area, but connected the university in Champaign. Eventually it evolved to be as far stretching as to Danville and then to Springfield, and it was extended ultimately to St. Louis. And it was a very efficient and popular way of moving around, and but it was abandoned basically in the 50s, I think it is. And, but the question has come up whether it's possible to reimagine this, and since this is a visionary document, what's the possibility of including some information or some direction in that area? Now, during our conversation in the joint committee meeting, it was pointed out that the plan hadn't been really supported to the degree that it became functional, and but there had been a study by the Mass Transit Division in 2004, which they engendered like, I don't know, like a 25-page report, and it was very interesting. My interest is, my vision is that there's going to be changes in the environment interest and in transportation that will evolve and will ultimately probably come back to this question. So I propose that, or I request, I guess, that that there be some mention of that in the document, not to say that we're going to rethink the entire document, but that it's useful to our community, certainly, to include that as a transportational option, and considering that we're like talking about 2040, that it may really be something that as a seed may be useful for future planning and might also allow us to be one of the first communities to receive funding for it because we include it in our visionary thinking. Just as so many of our projects that Public Works Director William Gray mentioned were possible for us because we had these ideas in hand, we were able to receive money for these projects because we are shovel ready. So I did forward to you an email that included 2 paragraphs, which I've also forwarded to the City Council members. And my request would be that it would be considered to add these 2 paragraphs. One of them was merely a bullet point under multimodal connectivity on page 109. And the second one was just to add another category under the future transportation systems on page 132. And there's a list of the various things, including rail, plane, automobile, travel, pedestrian, bicycle. Just reminding the people who read the plan in the future that we have a historical connection to an interest in electric rail systems, and that recently the city, the Champaign-Urbana Mass Transit District did an extensive study on what they called fixed guideway rail lines. Whether we go with a fixed guideway rail line or some other electrified system, this is a very sustainable choice. It produces less carbon monoxide, and it would be a compelling addition to the document. So that's my request. I don't know if you'd like to respond to that. You did mention, I did talk to you before the meeting, and maybe you can share your thoughts about what's possible at this point.
What I can tell you is we can take your comments. It's not our decision. We'll be putting together a list of all the comments received from the public, from all the agencies, and submitting those comments to the QATS Technical and Policy Committee. And they will decide. The comments will go into the document as public comments. There will be a chapter with all the public comments received that will be listing all the comments. Changes to the document will have to be determined by the QATS Technical and Policy Committee once we submit all the comments to them. We'll take your comments.
So I appreciate that. Some of the concerns that were made by members of the joint committee meeting was that because QATS and the funding is so highway department driven, that will they take these suggestions easily, because currently there's not a source of funding for them as far as interurban lines go. But just because that's true doesn't mean that it's not still a valid consideration for the future, because we don't know that in 15 years from the federal government there's going to be a reevaluation of transportation needs, and there might be a whole new movement toward rail design. So I hope that my hope would be to address the CUATS committee that you mentioned and urge them to include these points, the bullet points in the paragraph, into the document. It certainly doesn't devalue their study, but I think it broadens it in a way that that would be so useful for potential useful fundings, revenue streams, should the opportunity come.
Carol?
I just wanted to clarify, the presentation you still have to present to university. In essence, is this a draft or is this the document that we're going to be considering? And if so, the resolution that's before us is really in support and basically in support of what you're presenting at this time, that it's been already covered by the Department of Transportation.
The document, we call it a draft because until the document is approved by the QATS Technical and Policy Committee and the RPC Board, is a draft document.
I see. So we can only basically make a recommendation of accepting it as the draft.
I have a comment. Dennis, could you take the chair for?
Yes, I will. Bill, would you like to make a comment?
The reason we do that is because occasionally people who are chair could become belligerent and have to be shut down. And if you're chair, then there's nobody to do that. So as I am wont to do, no, I'll be nice, and I don't plan on being belligerent. I do have a couple questions. I know some of the recent MTD annexations aren't in there. I know you can't have everything up to date all the time because everything keeps changing, but I think those were in July, so if you can still include those on the MTD map, that'd probably be good. On the, you said that the public priorities chose, there was one particular one that's in my ward, the bicycle path that wraps around the President's house. You said that was one of the public priorities. I wondered if they actually were given the choice of having the bicycle path go in front of the President's house or go around it and pick the one going behind it. I know there was I think in the U of I plan, it was kind of left up in the air, like needed further study or something like that, but it was going around to the south in our old bicycle master plan. So was there a choice there for the people to make, or did they just pick what was up on the map?
Basically, we said, we asked people what kind of missing links on the bike network were out there, and that was one of the ones that was identified, connecting Race Street to Lincoln Avenue via Florida Avenue. Then the specific detail of the route, no, it was not.
Okay, so it's that,
Defined.
that connection that people were concerned about. And then I probably have like a page of comments on modeling because I do some spatial modeling, so I can just send those to you separately. I did have one question about it. How is this? What was the earliest long-range transportation plan? Was it 2020, or have you done them before that?
That I recall, there was a plan that was approved for 1999. In 1999, that was the first that I was involved with, in 1999. But I remember that there was one approved in 1994. It was just a really thin document, very general. Lately, we have become more detailed and specialized on what we are doing, and then the plan is more comprehensive.
So I was just wondering, I don't know if they were doing much modeling then, but if in the future, or if there's been past modeling efforts, it'd be interesting to have a portion of the plan devoted to updating the model results, looking at the model results from 20 years ago and seeing how accurate they were, to see, you know, if anything, if they're working, something like that. So
In the past, there was no modeling done. The first travel demand model was for the last LRTP, and at this time, then we decided to complete the modeling suite with all these other models.
Thank you.
And now I turn it back to Bill.
Okay. Are
Brown.
there any other questions? I think Charlie, Carol, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I don't want to disrespect Mr. Smythe, but I don't have a question. I was going to move resolution number 2014-11-059R, resolution to endorse this Champaign Urbanized Area Transportation Study Long Range Transportation Plan 2040 to council with a recommendation for approval.
Is there a second?
I'll second that with the understanding that
He
we
can
can
ask
still have
questions,
discussion.
Okay. And discussion. Charlie?
Okay, well, I'm not ready to send this to council, and I'd like to discuss the motion after the presentation is done and questions are asked. So let me continue with some questions here. The figures on 12.2 that show that these are just minor on page 154, 155 here of the new document presented. The couple of these bike and road projects are done. The one in Mahomet is done, as are the Windsor Road Bridge and the Washington. So this could probably be moved from yellow to green. And then since the and I was the same issue that Bill raised about the location of the bike or the multi-use path on Florida going around the president's house, since that's up in the air again. Can we make that just sort of a fuzzy line in some fashion that just shows it, just show it as a line there, a wider line or a red line or something that shows that the actual location is not determined yet? Just to reflect that we really don't know. People want it. I think everybody wants it. There are lots of ways to design that. There could be a mix of bike lanes and multi-use lanes there. So that's something that just needs to be studied. But I agree that should be a high priority project. One of my questions has to do with I thought about this with the high-speed rail insertion in the plan, since it's a big component looking to the future. For the economic modeling, the job modeling, and all of that, how dependent is that? And I'm looking to your modelers here. I don't know if they were the ones responsible for this. How dependent are the economic results in the traditional and your alternate model on actually having that high-speed rail really get started in 2030?
Fairly dependent. It's definitely by far the biggest project in terms of transportation. To be perfectly honest, it's quite difficult to see a drastic difference in just a 25-year span in a community of our size. So it's fairly prominent because of the scale of the project. It's not the only thing, but I would say it has a noticeable impact, yes. I couldn't give you numbers off the top of my head, but yes.
My last question related to this is, do we have to include on Curtis Road the language that you've changed to here, if I can find it? There's a typo in number 8. It says, and I indicated that in my comments, it says reconstruction the segment of Illinois 130 between Lincoln Avenue and Curtis Road.
Oh, I did change that.
Oh, it is
I hope
Florida.
that's
It is supposed to
updated
be
in
Florida,
the newest.
right?
Yeah.
You do mean Florida there, right?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay, then backing up to 7 here, you're still saying that the choices 2035 said proposed to be constructed to match. That's the part that I have the most problem with here, is just having somebody say that this is a 4-lane road, even including the language of 2035 in there. I would really encourage you to just say that this segment needs to be studied, and just leave out what I think is a red flag for the university.
Okay, we will definitely note that and take that to the technical and policy committees.
Mayor Preston.
Yeah, we already at QATS, we've already said that there's going to be a study there, and other units of government had agreed on road, and the university didn't sign it after they said they would. So I'm not eager to say, well, if the university doesn't like it, we should just do what they want. I think Urbana has an interest in this as well.
Yeah, no, I don't object to that. What I'm saying is that I think even including the 4-lane road aspect is a red flag to the university. I want to get their cooperation on this. I suggested trying to work with them to come up with something in my comments, which I've submitted publicly on this, and so that's where I'm coming from on that.
Mayor?
There's an agreement with the university that this needs to be studied, so we're committed to doing this study. Okay?
So as part of that study, and that reminded me of my final question here on that, do you also study the roads that connect to, because if you improve Curtis, we're going to need to improve Philo Road, First Street, and Race, of course.
When we do corridor studies, we extend the area that we cover to be a whole segment that includes
Okay.
all the roadways crossing the corridor and surrounding the corridor. Then we'll
Yeah.
include the Windsor Road, probably Old Church, Curtis, and all the transversal roads. And as I mentioned last Thursday, we extended the scope of that on the scope of
Right.
services that we're submitting to IDOT from First to Illinois 130, instead of being limited to First to Race Street.
Carol?
And then
Oh,
sorry, just one
Go
question
ahead,
triggers the
one
other.
more.
So for Bill, when we do a capital improvement plan, these roads get in there, they're out there. Do we include, or is there anything in the projections, or is it just too far out to include things like what's going to cost to rebuild Philo Road, what's going to cost to redo Race out to these intersections?
You answered the question. It's way too far out for our 5-year crystal ball. And even Curtis Road is way beyond 5 years to even do a study. Excuse me, not the study, but to look at anything beyond a study. So that's a very distant project.
Carol?
I just wanted to clarify where this plan is in its actual life. It seems what you're taking is input for a plan that you need to go back and develop. But what I'm understanding we have before us now is a plan that has been developed through all of these processes you gave us, and now you're going to take this on the road to the university, and they're going to look at it. What is this?
No, the only agency, what we have done in the last 2 months is present the presentation that you saw to all the agencies that are members of QATS. Just last week, we received an email from the university. In the past, we have never presented to them. Just last week, we received an email from the university asking us for a presentation. What we are doing at this time, as part of the presentations that we are doing, is taking comments, and those comments that we received from the agencies and the comments that we received from the public until last week, we are compiling them. And then once we have those comments, we'll send those comments to the QATS technical and policy and receive direction from them regarding changes to the document. So far, we haven't received comments that are significant to change the document itself. My thinking is that due to the public involvement process that we have done and all the meetings that we have had with all the agencies, then there are no significant changes. We haven't received significant comments. The comments that we have received are general.
So would these additions that have been recommended here, would they be significant, or would the QATS committee have to consider their significance?
Exactly. That would be the point.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we're in discussion. Are there any more questions? Yeah, okay. There's still a question. Okay. Diane.
Yes, I had a question on the it's the section on SCALDS, and you're looking at proportion of housing unit density types. Are the charts on page 150 what you consider a model for these different traditional development or sustainable choices? And did you actually look at household density types in Champaign-Urbana, for example? I don't understand what are these charts supposed to be showing us?
Let's the modeler talk.
talking, is this table 1110 that you're referring
and
to?
1111,
These
but
two.
mostly 1110.
Okay. And could you repeat your question one more time?
What does this mean? I mean, it doesn't reflect reality in Urbana, so I'm asking, how were these charts used to develop this plan, I guess, or were they?
Well, so these numbers are actually outputs that we get from a land use model. So based on a land use model, we are able to predict how many housing units we're going to have of different types over the next 25 years. So this is what these numbers show, is that for these two different scenarios, what's going to be the breakup between single-family and multifamily units over the next 25
And
years. So
this is
these
all-
are modeled outputs that
And
we
these
get.
are over the entire area, not just the city, okay.
Yes, they are.
Because, I mean, the city of Urbana, for example, already has almost 65% of its household units are rental or multifamily.
Mhm.
And so it's much different from what you're showing as a model here,
Mhm.
25 years in the future.
So we're looking at, right,
Right, right.
Yeah.
So when you're
And-
looking at the whole area, you think this is what the
yeah,
shows.
so this is countywide, and it's my understanding that these proportions apply to new units only, perhaps?
So the new percentage is separately given in that same table. So the baseline numbers are the ones that we have currently in our planning area. So 55% single family and 45% multifamily. And then the other numbers are the ones that we are predicting for the two different scenarios.
And so we're only talking about the number of new units added. So for instance, in traditional development, if we were to be only developing on peripheral land, the vast majority of that would be single-family density. And so when we're talking about refocusing in the core, most of that new development, or not most of, but a much larger proportion is going to be multifamily. Whereas, of course, a lot of the older stock and existing stock is going to be denser and multifamily, where generally newer development that happens on the periphery will be almost entirely single family. So that shift is changing, and that shift has already started changing. I understand how it doesn't seem like it's a big difference because we're comparing it to the overall baseline, but in terms of new housing units, it's actually pretty significant that we're projecting that much multifamily. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
I'm starting to understand it. Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Mhm.
Dennis?
All right, so the next step is that it's going to be reviewed, these comments are going to be reviewed by the Quad's Technical Committee. Who comprises of the Technical Committee? When will they meet, and is it possible to direct, a recommendation to them directly, or do we need to allow you to do the presentations in our stead?
The next step for us is to go to the RPC board. By the intergovernmental agreement that we have, the QATS intergovernmental agreement, we need to get approval from the CCRPC board. The CCRPC is the designated agency as the MPO of the Metropolitan Planning Organization. The meeting with them is in November 21st. And after that, we'll have the approval by QATS Technical and Policy on December 3rd and December 10th. Our goal is this week to send the comments received to QATS Technical and Policy and get direction from them regarding those comments before the November 21st meeting.
So, to answer your questions, you can talk with your local representatives on those committees as to whether or not they can speak on your behalf, or those meetings are open to the public.
Those meetings are open to the public.
And so you could also attend those meetings.
And possibly comment or pitch again?
Oh, yeah.
Some thoughts?
Oh, yeah, for sure. The representative of the City of Urbana and QATS Technical are Libby Tyler and Bill Gray, and in the Policy Committee is the Mayor of Urbana.
Well, they've heard it then. I'm not very far away from my resources, so thank you. That does simplify things a little bit, and I urge my representatives to listen and to broaden the scope slightly, because it can only help and it certainly cannot hurt the scope of this report.
Eric?
So I just want to reinforce what the concern that Charlie has about specifying Curtis Road 20 years out as 4 lanes. And I especially am puzzled by that as emerging from the land use model, a land use model that's based on the sustainable assumptions. Because it seems to me that that 4-lane traffic, the 4 lanes on Curtis Road looks to my, instinctively to me, like an invitation for sprawl as opposed to an encouragement for infill.
The 4-lane roadway was proposed for the previous LRTP. As the mayor mentioned it, the QED's technical and the QED's policy that was discussed, and the decision was made to do a corridor study to look at the best suitable design for that roadway.
So if the study is yet to be done, shouldn't we omit the specification of that as 4 lanes, which appears, I think, in 3 places in this document?
We just distributed the document showing that area as a corridor study, not showing it as a 4-lane section. The comment about the 4-lane section is for the LRTP 2035, the previous plan. And we already said that we'll consider removing that.
Any other questions? Mike?
First, just a comment. I think along the lines of some of the other council members, I think there might be a need for a minor clarification of your map, an update, if you will. East Washington Street between 130 and Peffer Road has been improved. I don't think that was shown.
Are you talking about, which map are you talking about? The roadway map?
Yeah, the roadway map, there you go. So you've got the section of 130 between University and Florida being updated.
Mm-hmm.
East Washington has also been improved. So from there, heading west on East Washington to Peffer, right, Phil?
Yeah, technically, that's part of the High Cross Road project. That's the legs of the intersection. It could be shown to clarify, because, we are getting credit for
Why not?
a
'Cause
stretch
it's
of
a lot of
Washington Street.
asphalt.
So I think the comment is the yellow line should go to Pfeffer on the west and, several hundred feet to the east.
Yeah.
It's an intersection improvement is what it is. And it's accurate. It is nearly done
Yeah.
work.
It'll be done by the time you vote on this, so. Maybe not striped. Well, no, it is temporarily striped. Anyway, just a minor clarification, just. Okay, so more importantly, I noticed that you had a lot of public participation, had the bus out and had people vote and that kind of thing, and I think that's great. I did notice, however, that the top vote getter got, I believe, 209 votes. So,
Couldn't speak to that.
pardon me?
I don't know exactly, but.
Okay, well,
go ahead.
I just,
Uh-huh.
whatever it is,
Sure.
so a couple hundred votes.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my question is, how much weight is given to those public participation type of things when we're talking about a multi-decade document involving hundreds of millions of dollars, involving a huge community? How much does 209 votes ultimately count in terms of determining priorities here?
Well, it is ultimately up to each agency to decide which projects they'll implement. Part of that has to do with when funding is available and what type of funding is available. In terms of what we decided to include on this document, like I said, we had each agency submit projects. And so this was just our way of responding to those agency kind of hopes for the future, and then allowing the public to then communicate with the agency in terms of what they thought was most important. So part of the goal of this plan is to really get a better idea of what the user experience is in the community and to insert their voice as much as possible.
Okay, believe me, I'm not trying to diminish that in any way. I think that's a very important part of this, but I'm just, Bill.
No, this plan provides a lot of information to us, this 1,500 comments, so that Craig Schronkwaller and I and other staff members, when we look at the capital improvement plan, for example, you know, this information, this document helps us shape, you know, some of the decision-making that we ultimately take to council for consideration in the next 5 years. So in my mind, whether it's one comment on something we didn't think about or reconfirming what we thought, or 200 votes, if you will, 1 or 200 or 2,000 votes, it's a matter, it's good information for us to be aware of. And again, this document helps us in our planning.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Like I say, I'm not trying to diminish it. I'm just wondering how much weight is given to that, how that is taken into consideration in the entire deliberation about the overall document. You're modeling in terms of population and jobs. I understand the high-speed rail is a big part of that, but you're talking about 49,000, roughly, I believe, 49, 50,000 population increase, 61. So you're talking about jobs outstripping
That's right.
population.
Right.
That just seems irrationally exuberant to me.
It does shock a lot of people.
Yeah.
It shocks
shocks
us
the
too.
realists.
Sure.
Is who it shocks.
So what I can say to that, again, is that in reality, it just represents a decrease in the unemployment rate, and not to unreasonable levels. I mean, it's actually an average of the previous 15 years, I think, pre-2008. That said, again, there's still big numbers. So our population and projections are not models per se. We use projection methods from statisticians at the university to get kind of some base numbers. And then, like I said, we take each of those numbers for population and employment for each of the 307 traffic analysis zones in the county and run them past each of the municipalities. And so, for instance, Libby and some of the planners looked at all of those numbers for the Urbana traffic analysis zones, and we went through them zone by zone to look at what development was anticipated there in terms of population and employment, and that's how we got our final numbers.
Okay.
So again, they're just projections, but we do feel like we used all of the information we could have, and we have a lot of good local information in terms of what we expect to see in the future. So,
was there any consideration given in the model to trending with regard to the labor participation rate?
yes and no. Those are built into kind of the initial run of the numbers, but then, like I said, the final numbers were really determined by each of the municipalities.
So in your modeling with regard to the labor participation rate, did we look at the fact that it has literally bottomed out at less than 1978 rates at the current time, and that we're hoping it does some crazy bounce upward to get 12,000 more jobs than people who exist here?
Some of that was considered, although our numbers were run over a year ago. So we didn't have, we're not using like yesterday's studies on the labor participation rate because obviously this process takes a long time, and so we used the best numbers we had at the time.
A year ago it was about 2% better than it is now. Okay, so not a huge difference.
No.
It's a little less than 63 now. It was about 2% better a year ago. So I find those numbers stunningly unrealistic.
I will say, too, the two fastest growing industries right now, and currently, but also projected into the future, are the healthcare industry and the education industry. And so we didn't use kind of the most optimistic rates for those, but given that those are massive employers in our community, the numbers look huge.
Massively important employers in our community, which we don't often appreciate around here on a regular basis. But that is one good point that you raise. the university's collaboration with Carl Hospital, I think, is a very, very fantastic opportunity for this community. And I hope that that ultimately helps to realize these numbers and make me a liar.
Mayor Preston?
Yeah, I think all our economic development work is to try to increase employment. So, I mean, that's something that we're
I
striving for.
100% agree with you.
Yeah.
I just think that projecting 12,000 more jobs than people over the next couple of decades is just completely unrealistic. I hope I'll be the first person to admit that I hope I'm wrong.
I can throw in a comment without relinquishing the chair, maybe. Just sometimes when you're looking at population and jobs, you aren't looking at the same geographic area, because the jobs, people might be commuting into the area from outside the area, either reverse commuting by high-speed rail from Chicago, or buying homes where they want to live in the country or something, and commuting inside the urbanized area. So you can definitely have job growth in the urbanized area without having equivalent population growth, because the population growth might be occurring outside the urbanized area. Are there any other comments, questions? Charlie?
Yeah, well, so in the modeling, Mike brings up a good point. How does, it's interesting that it's tied to education. Well, it seems like to have the 12,000 jobs, given that those are probably going to be, to some extent, some skill jobs, if projections are, if I understand the way things are going, education's going to have to grow to match that. Is that part, is their educational system part of the modeling itself that goes into the actual job projections, or?
Well, I'm not sure I understand your question specifically. The original employment numbers are industry specific. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, well, I think, we need a certain level of education to have the bodies to fill skilled jobs.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I can see the education sector being driven by the need to bring in these skilled jobs. You already see it going on at Parkland already, in response to some of the needs of the local industries. But it seems like, that would have to ratchet up to make these $12,000 or 12,000 optimistic projections.
They're going to get educated elsewhere and brought in by high-speed rail.
Well, that's Bill's scenario.
No, I'm just...
Eric?
Yeah, I guess I feel, my guess is no better really than Mike's, but I'm much more optimistic, Mike, than you are. And I guess I am for two reasons. One is that I do see both our healthcare and our education enterprises locally as being robust and still capable of growth. But I also am optimistic by the fact that we're improving our transportation infrastructure to open up other areas for industrial development that really haven't been opened before. And so I don't know to what extent that I don't know how you calculated the rate of job growth that you did. I don't know whether you took into account, things like extending Lincoln Avenue to Olympian Drive and Olympian Drive over to Route 57 and so forth, and just really opening up quite a substantial area for industrial development that could be complementary to the technology hub that we have at the university. But that, I don't know, that makes me at least feeling that this optimistic scenario may not be completely unrealistic.
And Mike?
I would be 100% willing to concur with you if the tax climate in the state was better, and if states are laboratories of our republic, which I truly believe they are. Illinois is is being outpaced by numerous of our fellow states as competitors for a serious expansion of business. So it's not just, in my mind, transportation infrastructure. It's not just in my mind, you know, what are the other amenities of the community, but it also has to do with the economic climate of our state. And Illinois has been recently referred to, I think, very adequately, very aptly, I should say, as the Argentina of the United States by our own George Will. And so I think no matter what we do, and I think we should do everything we can, and this is a lot of great work right here, but there's still far more to do on a state level before we can consider that that we're going to be able to flourish in this community to our full potential. And the only way that's going to happen is if the folks in state government take notice and start to make us a more competitive state.
Okay, we are definitely in discussion now. Charlie.
I still have a question here. When could we expect feedback from the policy and technical committees?
As I said, we'll be sending the comments to them this week. Hopefully by next week we'll have responses from them, because by November 21st it will be presented to the RPC board, and you will be attending that meeting, then you will know the results.
Okay, is there any discussion of the motion on the floor? Charlie.
Yeah, I'm personally not ready to send this on, and I'm gonna vent here with my issues, which you've all seen. My problem with this is the timeline. I understand and I appreciate all of the very good public input that went into getting a draft plan. It's a draft. There is all this feedback that's going on in the month of October at the same time that agencies are being asked to approve the draft plan. If this were done right, there'd be a draft. It would get discussed by the public. Public comments would be taken. It would go to the policy and the technical committees, and it would get another round. And we see a second draft, and that one might be the final version. You know, that would be the one where one would say, oh, let's fix the typos. Okay, and so what's happened here is we've been pushed up against a federal deadline or a state and federal deadline, and I just don't like that approach. I don't like being pushed to decide on something of this magnitude that is incomplete. You know, there have been suggestions from lots of people, and now we're supposed to go trust the policy and the technical committee to incorporate what they think are the right things without us getting another look at this. So I will vote against sending this to council. I think it should be, we should wait and keep this in committee and do that and make a final decision on the 24th after we get feedback from the technical committees and the RPC.
Any other discussion? What is the meeting schedule? Are we meeting next week?
We are not meeting next week because we have 3 people that'll be gone.
So this would go to council?
Well, actually, we have 4 people that'll be gone. On the 10th. Oh, you won't be here on the 17th either? I think it's a mistake to say this document is going to dictate everything. This document changes all the time. So I think you have to kind of move forward with it. I don't think we're going to benefit the city of Urbana by not getting federal funds for roads.
Any more discussion, Charlie?
Well, I don't see how, you know, if this is due at the end of December, then why are we in such a rush? Okay, we have time to discuss this a little bit more and take a little bit more public input and see a little bit more of the final product. I just don't see enough of the final product yet to be comfortable with sending something this important forward, which is going to get cited back to us as what was decided by the public and the elected officials in the future. It's already happened to me in past occasions, having served here for 14 years. I've had things thrown back at me because it was approved earlier on. You know, there's some things in here that we really need to bring up and really discuss as a community going forward, even after this document gets approved, that to me are really significant things. There's the modeling. There's what kind of roads and what kind of roads do we really want? You know, should they be 2-lane? Should they be 4-lane? Should there be 4-lane roads which have empty farm fields on either side of them that serve no real purpose, which is what I'm seeing built. You know, yes, it's 25 years out. We don't have the money for these things yet. It is a living document, but it has gotten us to the point that today we are a less dense community than we were 20 years ago. Urbana is less dense by 575 people per square mile. Champaign by 625, if I remember the numbers correctly. As a planning area, we're 200 people less dense per square mile. So that says we're going in the wrong direction. And the long-range transportation plan has been used by the federal government to build roads, mostly new roads. We need to be working with them to start addressing the needs of their existing roads and maintaining that which we have. You know, when we build new roads, we have to do more. We have to grow more to pay more to keep them going, and it's a never-ending spiral.
Mayor Preston.
Yeah, I want to comment on density. We have more parkland than is the national average. So is that bad? And, you know, a lot of our land in Urbana is not taxable, so it's not inhabited by people. So I'm not really sure that the density is a terrible thing that's happened to us if we expanded our parkland. And also, sometimes you want to reduce the density. I think we have a problem in southeast Urbana of apartment buildings that have become problem properties. And the solution there and the solution on Learman Avenue was to lower the density. So I think you need to maybe not take some of these things so literally and view this for what it is. We need to have a plan, and look, we had a plan for Olympian Drive, and we had to go back and redo things over and over again. So just because it's on a piece of paper doesn't mean it's going to happen, because there's always going to be people that will review it, and we'll have to come up with the money and the exact method of implementing things. So I don't think there's any problem with passing it because it's not written in stone.
Okay, we have a motion by Amon, second by Jacobson. Discussion. One more discussion. Dennis.
Yeah, okay, so, all right, I kind of hear you, Charlie. I know that we are referring to a lot of decisions that are made today from the 2005 comprehensive plan. Now, we've gone back and revised them, but it's much easier for the city of Urbana to revise its own plan than it's going to be to revise this plan that has so many agencies putting their energy into it and for the finalization. Now, if the due date for accepting it is maybe the presenters can clarify at what point does the plan have to be finalized ultimately, so that is the process then that you're just going to be churning it in to the federal government, or for to fulfill the obligation for the next funding cycle? And is that simply a mailing to arrive in Springfield or to the federal government at a certain date? What's the problem really of hearing how the plan is accepted, how the comments are integrated into the plan, how some of the maps maybe are corrected as requested by the technical committee, so that maybe at the beginning of December, we can look at it, feel confident, and finalize a plan that we prefer to have as far as the details go.
The intention is to have the approval by QATS technical on December 3rd, QATS policy on December 10th. Once we have the document approved, we need to produce several copies of the document and mail the document to IDOT, Federal Highway, and Federal Transit before the holidays.
Eric?
I have confidence that our representation on the policy and the technical committees have heard our concerns and will represent them. So I'm comfortable with moving this document forward as we see it, with the understanding that it's still going to be, our concerns will be represented on those committees, and they'll be taken into account.
Okay, Carol. Okay, I was about to say. Okay, we have a motion to send this to council with recommendation to approval. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it, so this will go to council on the 17th. Is that a committee of the whole meeting on the 17th or council?
We sometimes are going to have two meetings on one night. We can't have a council meeting following a committee, but because we're skipping the 10th, we might have two meetings on one night.
Okay. So, seeing no further business, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.